Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see you all. My name is Reese Brown. I'm the Associate Director of Impact at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University. I have the pleasure of welcoming you this morning. At least it's a morning here on the East Coast, perhaps even earlier morning on the West Coast in the United States if you're joining us there, or much later in the day if you're joining us from Europe or even elsewhere. We're delighted to have you here. I have the pleasure of not only introducing you or welcoming you now, but introducing our two speakers. We have we'll hear from some other folks, but the two leaders of this project, Dr. Tyler VanderWeele and Dr. Christina Hinton. So I'm going to go ahead and read their bios, and then after that, I'm going to pass it over to Christina. So if you're not familiar with him already, Tyler VanderWeele is the John L. Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology in the Departments of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and the Director of the Human Flourishing Program and Co-Director of the Initiative on Health, Spirituality, and Religion at Harvard University. He holds degrees from the University of Oxford, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard University in mathematics, philosophy, theology, finance, and biostatistics. His methodological research is focused on theory and methods for distinguishing between association and causation in the biomedical and social sciences, and more recently on psychosocial measurement theory. His empirical research spans psychiatric and social epidemiology, the science of happiness and flourishing, and the study of religion and health. He's the recipient of the 2017 President's Award from the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies. Dr. VanderWeele has published over 500 papers in peer-reviewed journals, is author of the books Explanation and Causal Inference, Modern Epidemiology, Measuring Well-Being, Handbook of Religion and Health, and A Theology of Health, and writes a monthly blog posting on topics related to human flourishing for Psychology Today. In 2026, Dr. VanderWeele was appointed as a member of Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences by Pope Leo XIV. Christina Hinton leads the Human Flourishing Program's work in education. At Harvard, she leads research on character skills, loving relationships, and flourishing among children, adolescents, educators, and parents internationally. She also leads the Evidence-Based Parenting for Flourishing Families initiative. Dr. Hinton is also the founder and CEO of Research Schools International, which carries out research and professional development in schools around the world. Prior to these roles, Dr. Hinton was a faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. In addition, she worked in multilateral diplomacy and international policymaking at the OECD's Center for Educational Research and Innovation at UNICEF. Dr. Hinton completed her doctorate and master's at Harvard in Education, Neuroscience, and Child Development, and her bachelor's at Swarthmore in Neuroscience and Education. We're fortunate to be hearing from both of them this morning, and without further ado, I'll pass it off to Christina.
You're on
Christina, I
mute,
believe you
Christina.
are on mute.
Oh.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Reese. We're so delighted that you've joined us all today. This session is on youth flourishing. So we're going to talk a bit about youth flourishing, some of the measures we've developed, and some exciting new opportunities to get involved for school networks and schools. So before we kind of jump in with all of that, I wanted to turn it over to Dr. Tyler VanderWeele, who wanted to share an upcoming webinar with you all in case you want to join that as well.
Well, thank you, Christina, and likewise, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on youth flourishing. A central aim of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard has been the study and promotion of human flourishing. Part of that work is carried out by flourishing assessments. Our primary 12-item flourishing measure for adults has been used by millions of people across the globe in all 6 populated continents in our global flourishing study, but also in our work with universities, with schools, with clinical settings and workplaces. And this work has helped us gain insights into the determinants of flourishing, but also the distribution of flourishing to identify who needs help, in what ways, what are each person's and each community's strengths and weaknesses, and how might we improve flourishing in various ways. We're excited to be able to share with you important advances today with regard to the measurement of youth flourishing, work that Dr. Christina Hinton has helped lead at the program. And I think this work really will expand the opportunities both for the study and the promotion of flourishing worldwide. The focus today will be on the measures themselves, with which Christina will give an overview of. But this work will help motivate and provide an important foundation for our new Flourishing Schools project, where we will be working with networks of schools to try to advance flourishing within school contexts globally. Christina will be giving more details on this project later on and its relation to other work that we're doing. A brochure is available on our website along with more information on the Flourishing Schools project. Again, today's webinar will focus on the measures themselves, but on May 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we will be hosting another webinar focused specifically on this more practical work of advancing flourishing in schools, and we would welcome you or anyone else interested to join us in that work as well. But I'm grateful to Christina and to everyone at the Human Flourishing team for this important work on the development of these youth flourishing measures. And with that, I will hand things over to Christina to provide an overview and again, more details on the Flourishing Schools project.
Thanks so much, Tyler. So we're here to talk about flourishing, which we define as a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. In our conception of flourishing at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, we've really tried to distill kind of universals in terms of domains that nearly all people feel can contribute to a good life. And so we would say that flourishing includes at least these domains, although there can be other domains that are important in certain cultural contexts, or there's variation based on your religious background or philosophical background, etc. We feel that these domains are fairly universally accepted as contributing to a good life. And so the domains are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, and financial and material stability. And we've actually operationalized this conception of flourishing with validated measures. So as Tyler mentioned, our adult flourishing measure, which you can see here, has been used in a representative sample of half the world's population and really does seem to resonate across countries and cultures in terms of what promotes our flourishing. And so more recently, we've been translating this flourishing measure using the same domains here for youth. And so that's part of what we want to share today. So we've developed an adolescent flourishing measure for ages 12 to 18, a childhood flourishing measure, and an early for ages 9 to 11, and an early childhood flourishing measure for ages 5 to 8. And I'll show you quickly what they look like. But Matt, hopefully you can also put the links in the chat. This is the adolescent flourishing measure. So it's very similar, but there's a few questions that we changed to make them more developmentally appropriate. Here's the childhood flourishing measure, which also has, again, the same core domains, but you can see the language is much more simple to be sure it's developmentally appropriate for 9 to 11-year-olds, that they can understand and answer these questions. And so one of the reasons we're hosting this event is because we've started to collect data on these various measures. And our adolescent and childhood flourishing measure, we've already collected data across 30 countries, but more research is needed to continue to adapt and validate them in different cultures and contexts. And so part of this session is an invitation. If there are researchers out there who want to use these measures and adapt them in your context, we would be greatly supportive of that. And so we really invite you to consider using these measures, which are freely available for research and non-commercial purposes. And so Matt will share the links to those in the chat. We've also very recently developed an innovative early childhood measure. So ages 8 and below It's very difficult for them to do these kind of written assessments reliably. And so typically they would need a one-on-one interviewer if you wanted to learn about their well-being. And we wanted to create a measure that could be used at classroom level with just a teacher support. So you could kind of have 30 kids, for example, taking it in a classroom with one adult rather than the one-to-one adult. So we've worked with a team, Play Verto, to translate this measure into basically a game that the kids can play. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that as well.
Listen to the question, then choose the option that feels right to you. If you fill this bucket up with all the happy things in your life, would it be empty, a little bit full, or full to the top? My bucket is full to the top with happy things.
So the idea is they can answer this even before they
touch the arrow at the bottom when you've made your choice to listen to the question, then choose the option that feels right to you. How do you feel most of the time? I feel happy most of the time. I feel okay most of the time. I feel sad most of the time. I feel happy most of the time. You've just collected your first gem. Great job! Ready to explore how your mind and body feel? Let's go to the next part where we explore your health. Listen to the question, then choose the option that feels right to you. How does your mind usually feel? My mind usually feels calm. Listen to the question, then choose the option that feels right to you. Do you eat healthy food? I eat lots of treats. I eat some healthy foods and some treats. I eat healthy food most of the time. I eat healthy food. Brilliant! You have collected gem number 2. Next, we'd like to know if you have a couple of important things.
So you can kind of get the sense of how that one works. From those questions, but essentially we've mapped it onto each of the domains. So similar to the other flourishing measures, so that each domain is kind of translated for early childhood as well. So yeah, again, this is partly an invitation for you all to learn about these measures and use them in your own context. We're hoping that other researchers in context, different cultures, different languages, and we can kind of adapt and validate them so that they're available, potentially globally for use to kind of track child and adolescent flourishing. Okay, so I want to transition a bit to implications of this work. So what does this mean in education? What is the purpose of education in our modern world? And I want to give you a minute to consider that yourself before I tell you what I think. But essentially, with the kind of rise of the age of AI and this mental health crisis among youth globally, we would argue that we really need to re-envision our educational approach in a way that supports students' holistic well-being in concert with their learning and really prepares them to make meaningful contributions to the changing world. And we would also argue that flourishing seems poised to serve as a potential North Star for this re-envisioned approach. Some of the reasons that we think that is that, as I mentioned in the beginning, in our conception of flourishing, we've really captured what seems to be universal, at least for many people around the world, in what contributes to a good life. So we think it's a relatively universal conception. Another is that we've developed these measures that really enable us to measure and track flourishing. So that allows us to see what promotes flourishing over time, and so forth. So it kind of gives us something we can really use as a measurement for progress. And in fact, we're not the only ones who think that we need to re-envision our educational approach. There's really an international movement, which is quite exciting, that's really around not defining success in education as kind of narrowly defined academic outcomes, but instead really defining it as supporting a broad range of capabilities that includes academic learning, but also, for example, character skills, and a sense of meaning. And so I'm going to mention a couple of projects that are really leaders in this area. One is the OECD's Education for Human Flourishing initiative, which again says that education, future focused, needs to nurture a broader range of capabilities and needs to restore meaning to youth's lives. And so you can read more about that. Maybe Matt can put a link in the chat to that, so you can learn more about it. But it's a wonderful visionary piece on what education might be in the near future, and how we might even start to achieve that. Another leading initiative in this field is from UNESCO's Happy Schools project. And we're very lucky to have Sonia here with us today, who leads this project at UNESCO, and she's going to share a few words about that.
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to thank you and your team, and especially Tyler, Matt, and Reese for inviting me. So we have a project at UNESCO called the Happy Schools Project, and it is very much in alignment with the Human Flourishing Project at Harvard. We, similar to what Christina was just explaining, UNESCO is thinking or is promoting schools to be places where students need to flourish, and where education systems and the teachers and everyone involved in the school community should be supporting children to focus on their well-being and rethink what the purpose of education is. This is not a new project. It's been around for over 10 years. It started in our Bangkok office. And the reason why it started in this region is because of the very intense focus on doing well on very high stakes exams. Students and teachers and parents were very stressed, where schooling was basically seen as the place where people have to go to memorize for exams, so they could be successful in life. And to deal with these very stressful situations, and to get kids to re-engage with school, and to think of school as a place where children should be happy to go to, and not a place that is causing them stress, the UNESCO's Bangkok office developed this Happy Schools project. May I ask you to please move to the next slide? Over the 10 years, we've developed what we call this Global Happy Schools framework, and it covers all of the same concepts of human flourishing that Christina and Tyler were just talking about, but applied at the school level. So it covers pedagogy, it covers curriculum, it covers the learning spaces, as well as the relationships between peers, between students and teachers, as well as the learning spaces that make up the school. Over the years, we've developed this framework into 4 different pillars: people, process, place, and principles, and 12 criteria that are meant to support schools to take a look at their school environment and to see what they can do to make their schools happier places. And next slide, please. And so what we've done most recently is develop what we're calling a diagnostic toolkit. This is a set of questionnaires that are directed at students, school leaders, teachers, and parents to answer. There are no right or wrong answers. This is not an assessment. It's similar to the human flourishing measures, where the respondents respond to questions that ask them about how they're feeling on certain things that are aligned with our Happy Schools framework. Afterwards, what happens is that we take a look at all the scores, and we give the school a school report where the schools could see areas that they should be celebrating, where they have scored highly. For example, perhaps the kids could report that they have really good positive relationships with their teachers, which is nice, but where they might have reported that there are areas that could use improvement that we know are connected to well-being. So maybe they don't have enough green spaces. So these are areas where the school together as a community, including the parents and as well as other people in the community that are connected to the school, can come together to design a happy school improvement plan. So as part of this project, we are inviting schools to participate in a pilot study where we are aiming to refine our questionnaires and to improve them. The result will be to make the Happy Schools Diagnostic Toolkit a global public good, which means it would be available globally free of charge for schools to use, to take a look at how they and how well their school is aligned to our Happy Schools framework. I am happy to provide more information, and at the end of this webinar, Christina will give you an email where you can write should you be interested in participating, and as well as if you need more information, we're happy to provide it. Thank you so much, Christina, and everyone, for letting me introduce the Happy Schools Toolkit.
Thank you so much, Sonia. We're so inspired by this project. It's just an incredible opportunity for schools. Wonderful. Okay, so now I want to tell you a bit about the Flourishing Schools project, which, as Tyler mentioned, we have an official launch for in May, but just to kind of share what we have in mind and some opportunities to get involved in the future. So Tyler and I developed this Education for Flourishing framework along with the OECD, which proposed that education for flourishing might involve flourishing character skills as well as academic achievement. And we felt that there was quite a lot of traditional assessments for academic achievement already, but we saw a gap in measuring flourishing and character skills. And so our Flourishing Schools project grew out of that in an effort to kind of fill that gap. And so we've launched this Flourishing Data Collaborative, and we're going to invite school networks to join that data collaborative. And school networks that join will have a chance to participate in a survey on character skills and flourishing, as well as evidence-based practices that promote those outcomes. So this survey will include our youth flourishing measures. So the measures that I just shared for ages 9 and 11 and 12 to 18. The participants will answer their age, and then they'll automatically get the measure that's developmentally appropriate for them. It also includes our community well-being measure. So in our conception of flourishing, we don't flourish on our own, we flourish in community and in context. And so we measure flourishing not only at the individual level with the measures that I've shared so far, but we also have a community well-being measure. So we can look at flourishing as a community. For example, dimensions such as leadership and trust in the community. The survey also includes measures of character skills. So skills such as kindness, honesty, or gratitude. It has some demographic questions, And then it also has over 50 evidence-based practices to support character skills and flourishing. So for these practices, what we did is review the field on what we know is effective at promoting character skills and flourishing in schools. And we took the practices that have the most evidence behind them. So very similar to the Happy Schools framework in that sense of understanding what do we know about how to promote these character skills and flourishing, what practices really do work based on evidence, and we ask questions about those so we can get a picture. We then analyze this data to identify strengths and areas for growth in promoting character skills and flourishing. And so participating school networks receive a report of the finding. This is an example of a report we did for a pilot school that we worked with, Scots College. And the report has basically the findings. And these are just a few examples of what kinds of graphs would be in the report. But for example, average flourishing scores across domains. We also look at flourishing within different groups. So for example, by age. And that way we can see, are there certain groups that might benefit from targeted support? For example, in a lot of our projects, we find that flourishing on average decreases across the ages in many schools around the world. And so then we would say, well, is there a way we can support those older students in a more targeted way? And so we kind of look across groups for groups that might need extra support. And then we also, as I mentioned, we look across the character skills. So we might find that some skills are stronger or less strong. In the school, we might consider whether that aligns with the mission and values of the school. So if the school, has a certain mission, are those the character skills that are coming across the strongest, the ones that are stated in the mission? And if not, how might the school support them more strongly? We also look at a whole range of evidence-based practices. So this is just as an example, the relationships domain, but there are many others too that we look into. And so just seeing how much is the school doing these practices that we know can really promote flourishing. And we can identify, again, the strengths of where the school is really doing well at implementing them, and maybe where there's opportunities for growth. So for example, in this graph, you can see that teachers and staff have positive relationships with each other. Teachers have positive relationships with students. These are scored quite high. So it seems that the school is doing a very good job with the teacher relationships. Whereas the initiatives to support parents to have positive relationships is a bit lower. So maybe that could signal to the school that maybe they want to do more to involve parents in their school community, for example. And so it just kind of gives the schools a mirror of where they're at. And we really encourage the schools to kind of track this over time so they can see where they're making progress. And the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard has also partnered with Research Schools International to offer optional follow-up professional development for participating networks that are interested. So once they have these findings, we can help them unpack them and think about what changes they might want to make on the ground based on them. More specifically, we'll typically have a workshop for the schools in which we look through the report, unpack the findings, and consider practical implications. And then we often lead a virtual action research program where we meet with the educators once a month virtually, and they meet together in person at their school. And we guide them to create interventions that target the areas for growth identified by the research, as well as reflect on the impact of them. So essentially, for example, we might say, oh, we noticed the older students are flourishing relatively less. Is there something you'd like to do about that? We noticed in the past example, there's not a lot of support for parent-student relationships. Is there a new initiative you might want to do for that? Or we might find, for example, your school isn't doing a lot to connect with nature. Is there something you want to do there? And so we really let the educators decide and come up with something they're excited about doing in their school. And so we really would encourage schools to kind of engage in cycles of this research followed by professional development so they can really track progress over time. and see how flourishing improves as they're kind of measuring it, making changes on the ground, and measuring it again. Okay, so again, I just want to remind you of this date. Mark your calendars and more details to follow, but we would love to see you at our Flourishing Schools Project official launch on May 20th at 11 a.m. So we can tell you more details and you can have a chance to sign up if you're interested in that. And in the meantime, we invite school networks who are interested in our Flourishing Schools project to reach out to us. The emails are there on the bottom, or fill in our expression of interest form, which you can access through the QR code on this slide. And individual schools that might be interested in the Happy Schools project can also fill in their expression of interest form, email us, or email Sonia as well. And she can share her email too, or the Happy Schools email. And so, again, this is an invitation. We're hoping that we can really work together to use these measures to have a positive impact on flourishing in schools around the world. And we invite your partnership in that.
All right, so I think we're turning to questions at this point, right, Christina?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's been quite a few good questions in the chat. I don't know if either you, Christina, or Tyler would like to take this one. But there was a question earlier in the session about what makes this measure different. Positive psychology and mainstream psychology have been measuring a lot of these sorts of topics for a long time. So what's specifically unique about the measure itself and what it's measuring?
So our flourishing measure at the Human Flourishing Program really is drawing upon past work on well-being. For example, in that first domain, happiness and life satisfaction, that life satisfaction question, how satisfied are you with life as a whole? These days, from zero, not at all satisfied, to 10 completely satisfied, is perhaps the most widely used well-being question. In the literature, it's been used by the OECD in the UK's annual survey. It's been used by Gallup. It's in this year's US National Health Interview Survey. So we are drawing upon a great deal of the past work on well-being. A lot of that has been more focused on happiness and on life satisfaction. And so the flourishing measure is trying to broaden that. Yes, happiness and life satisfaction are important. But we also care about meaning in life and about character and trying to be a good person and about our relationships and about physical and mental health. So the flourishing measure is in most cases making use of priorly empirically validated questions and assessments, but trying to bring them together for a more holistic assessment. But then, of course, what's somewhat unique about the work that has been presented today and that Christina has been leading is trying to extend those same concepts to younger ages as well. And the initial empirical work and validation for the 12 to 18 year olds and for the 9 to 11 year olds does look pretty good thus far, and we're excited to see how the new assessment, which is rather different in its animated form for 5 to 8 year olds, might play out as well.
Since you're talking about the measure, before we move on to so many of the great questions, it was Claire Cole, I believe, who asked another question, and this might get to sort of the tension between a composite measure item versus several underlying components. So her question was, there seems to be a tension in the survey instrument between how young people can be supported contribute positively in the world if they've consistently experienced all aspects of their life as good. How would that prepare them for adversity or empathy or others who face adversity? How do you see that, framing?
Yes, I really love Hannah's response to that as well. And I'm sure, Tyler, you have something to add, but we do see hardship as a way of building character, which is one of the core dimensions of flourishing. So we certainly wouldn't say that you can't flourish if you have hardship. Tyler, do you want to add thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, we typically report flourishing in a multidimensional manner. So one may be flourishing in certain ways and not flourishing in others. And flourishing really is an ideal. It's never a state that's perfectly attained. There's always room for improvement. I mean, it is the case that some people really are struggling and struggling in multiple domains. And I do think these assessments can make that clear and make clear who needs help and in what ways. But as Christina indicated, sometimes the adversity itself can be not, it is not always, but sometimes can be a means for growth. And we see this in some of the studies that we've carried out. If we compare, for example, in certain settings, Black versus white populations within the United States, we will often see the standard health disparities and financial disparities, but we also see strengths of the Black communities, often higher sense of purpose and greater sense of relationships than we find in white communities. And so I do think that multidimensional assessment of flourishing can point to both the strengths and the weaknesses of individuals and communities. And so the hope with the measurement work is certainly a better understanding of flourishing and capacity to promote it, but also identifying, celebrating the strengths, identifying and working to improve the areas where growth is needed. So, we don't view this measure as principally kind of an evaluation, but really as a way to understand what actions need to be taken, who needs help, and in what ways.
Absolutely. I think I'm just reading Hannah's response as well, and I think it's worth reading part of this out too, just to add on. She said, importantly, flourishing includes the capacity to contribute to others. Character and close relationships are constitutive of flourishing domains, not optional add-ons. So a young person who flourishes is not one shielded from hardship, but one who has the relational, moral, and psychological resources to face adversity and respond constructively with resilience. I think that's an important point as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to elevate one question, and I think Tyler's answer or his last comment sort of touched on this, but again, I'm seeing a lot of questions around sort of these very broad terms. So Constance Easton asked a question about, maybe some missing or nuance or lack of clarity around the nuance of questions of character, such a huge question. So back to Tyler again, I think you already mentioned this a little bit, but back to that, how is the measure sort of drawing out a lot of the differences and a lot of the unique characteristics that are implicated in diversity and cultural lenses?
Yeah, so the flourishing assessments that we've been using for adults and for youth are admittedly pretty crude. I mean, we've got two questions in each of these six domains. It does give insight, and we've seen repeatedly it gives considerable insight, but it doesn't give a lot of nuance. And so, especially when we're turning to matters of education and student formation, I think taking a much deeper, closer look at matters of character, of development, of student formation is quite critical. And so in this Flourishing Schools project, we will be making use of the VIA Institute's character strengths assessment for youth. And this covers a range of 24 different character strengths, which in their prior work they presented evidence for being shared across cultures and world religions and different countries and continents. And certainly some of these character strengths are given greater emphasis in certain contexts than others. But by looking at all 24, one really does get a snapshot. And as Christina indicated earlier, I think doing this at the school level really can provide insight with regard to whether a school is accomplishing its goals and its stated values. When we did this piloting work with Scots College for our Flourishing Schools project, we were able to map Scots College values with the different character strengths from the VIA assessment. And sure enough, I think 70-80% of them, they were doing very well at what they valued. But there were a couple where there needed to be growth if they were going to achieve their aspirations. And again, I think these assessments can be quite useful in these ways as well. I will make maybe one other comment on which came up in the Q&A that pertains to how do you think about these matters in cross-cultural context or in the setting of a pluralistic society such as we live in. And I do think well-developed conceptions of flourishing are going to vary by culture and context and religious or philosophical tradition. But what we've tried to do at the Human Flourishing Program and what we're trying to do with this Flourishing Schools project work is really to focus on what's common, what's shared. And we have empirical evidence, for example, from our Global Flourishing study that each of these 6 domains, happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, and financial security, are almost universally valued. We ask people not just how they're doing, but how important these matters are to them. And we see in almost all of these countries in our Global Flourishing study, all 6 populated continents, that most people give an average response of 9 out of 10 in terms of importance. There is a little bit of variation across countries and certainly across individuals, but we see almost everyone values all of these domains highly. And so we think this is a good place to begin. I do think it's also the case, and this came up in the Q&A as well, that schools can't be held responsible for all aspects of a student's flourishing. They have tremendous potential to contribute, but they can't really replace entirely families or neighborhoods or religious communities. And so there's a question, well, what is the proper scope? And so what we've argued, this is in the OECD report that Christina and I published, but kind of a fuller treatment I've put in the chat with regard to some of the more philosophical issues around this. But what we put forward is that the proper scope of flourishing certainly is the development of students' cognitive and epistemic capacities and the acquisition of knowledge, which will unquestionably empower their future flourishing. But it's not just that. It's that, but it's not just that. It's also those aspects of flourishing, as put forward in this paper, around which there's consensus and which teachers and educational leaders are prepared to address. So again, it's not all aspects of flourishing. That would be too ambitious, too unfair for teachers, for schools, and just unrealistic with regard to the other communities that are shaping students' lives. But so it's not all aspects of flourishing. It's those aspects of flourishing subject to 2 restrictions. One, around which there's consensus, so that in a pluralistic society where there might be disagreements as to what is good, what's the proper way of formation, you restrict to those aspects of flourishing where there's general agreement. And again, I think that agreement is broader than is often taken. I think it does include happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, financial security. So it is relatively broad, but it's not everything. But it should also be restricted to where teachers and educational leaders are prepared to address. Importantly, that second restriction is not static. In some ways, it's aspirational. Given proper resources, teachers can have potentially the capacity and the time required to affect students' lives in a variety of other ways as well. But again, one needs to be realistic and say, well, if this is going to happen, we need teachers to have the resources, to have the time available, to have the capacity and the training to carry out this work. So that's what we put forward in this paper, and we draw upon that in the OECD metrics framework that we put forward, and I think helps kind of navigate some of these challenges. Importantly, with these considerations as well, and I think this also came up in the Q&A dialogue box, is an attentiveness to more disadvantaged settings where those resources and that time available may be less, and so I do think for this movement of education for flourishing not to increase disparities, it is important to take a close look at more disadvantaged settings and schools, and really help provide the resources, the additional time, perhaps additional teacher compensation for those who are wrestling with these matters, to provide this work of student formation, of the promotion of flourishing, to kind of create those opportunities in more disadvantaged settings as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that we're using these measures to track progress and intervene, not to kind of evaluate. And for example, we wouldn't want schools kind of using these measures to evaluate and then allocate resources based on scores or something like that. I think we want to use them in the ways Tyler's talking about, to understand, and then, if anything, the opposite, allocate more resources where there's targeted support needed. Another question that came up in the chat was about academic achievement. And
could I just touch on that, and then we'll return? Yeah, I do think this is an important point, that these subjective self-report assessments should not be used in high stakes contexts where to reward teachers or schools. Once you do that, it's really, the game is off, because then you introduce incentives to misreport. So I think these measures are extremely important and helpful with regard to understanding the strengths and weaknesses of particular students or schools or classrooms and how to help. But if you start using self-report in high stakes contexts, I think things really can go awry. And in our metrics framework, we make this point very, very clearly. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that point. I do think it's worthwhile for states to collect this sort of data, to have an understanding, but not in order to figure out which schools should be rewarded. It really should be more used to which schools need more resources and more help, which schools are struggling in this regard. Sorry, Christina, please go on.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a really important point. It's worth emphasizing again, I think. And I saw another question in the chat about academic achievement. I just wanted to mention that one of the core principles of the UNESCO Happy Schools initiative is that academic achievement and well-being are mutually reinforcing. And there's a great deal of research that kind of backs that up. And so I think we don't think of it as an either or, but that supporting students flourishing also supports their academic achievement, and supporting their academic achievement also supports their flourishing. And Tyler and I talk about that in our metrics article as well. And so just to add that in.
One question that caught my eye is that, I'm not sure about you, Christine and Tyler, but when I was a little school-aged young boy, I didn't have a lot of sense of the meaning of my life. And I think it was Fiona who asked a little bit about, what are some of the elements underlying meaning and purpose in the measure, and sort of how you see assessment and improvement in those areas.
Yes, it's a good question, and it's one of the questions we've adapted in the youth measures. So for example, we ask, are we learning things that will help us when we grow up? For the children, because that's probably a more developmentally appropriate version, because they're really just starting to construct a sense of meaning at those ages.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, our questions with regard to that meaning and purpose domain for the youth measures really are more focused around purpose than meaning. I mean, I do think systems of meaning do develop during these stages as well, but it is more difficult to assess, and more difficult, I think, for students to have a reflective sense as to whether I have a coherent system of meaning, whereas purpose, sometimes meaning and purpose are used interchangeably, but really meaning is understanding the relations of things, and purpose is more end-directed. And so we do focus more in these youth measures on purpose, as Christina was saying. Is there a sense of making progress to those goals I might have, or towards learning those things I might need in my adult life? So especially for the 12 to 18-year-olds, we do have a little bit more on meaning, but a lot of the questions really are focused, I would say, on purpose in the youth measures.
I saw a few questions on parenting as well, just to mention that we're launching an initiative on evidence-based parenting for flourishing families. So I added the link in the Q&A if anyone wants to learn more about that. We certainly, as Tyler said, see this as a partnership among families, communities, religious communities, governments, schools. Again, like it's not all up to the schools, but schools can play a key role. So.
Another thing that might be worth sort of speaking to is there's been several comments sort of about policy impact. I know the both of you have spent quite a lot of time sharing results of research with policy organizations. Can you talk a little bit about how you think the outcomes of conducting this research or doing this work might be not necessarily directly involved in policy, but how it might be shared out and how that might be useful to policymakers and something that people can see as a way to influence public policy?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, it's setting your sights on a broader goal for education. So, as I said, I think education for flourishing could be a potential framing for that broader goal. That's quite powerful. So I think that we need to be able to measure in order to track in the policy world, right? And so if we can only measure academic content, then that people tend to focus on that. So at OECD, they often say like measure what you treasure. So if you're looking to promote flourishing, you need to be able to measure it, to track it, to make traction there. So I think it really enables people to set their sights on a broader goal for education in the policy world. I don't know, Tyler, if you have anything to add, or even Sonia, if you're still here, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, Sonia, you can jump in, but I would very much agree with, everything Christina said. And I do really believe that what we measure, shapes what we discuss, what we know, what we aim for, the policies put in place to achieve those aims. I mean, in some ways, measurement itself constitutes an intervention. It shifts our values, it shifts our focus, it shifts our pursuits. And so I think the very act of measuring flourishing and understanding what's going well and what's not, where we need to work towards improvement, is itself very powerful in kind of the policy space. But Sonia, I'm happy to hand it over to you for your reflections as well.
I'm have no disagreement. I agree with what you both said. I can add that this is why in our Happy Schools toolkit, which are essentially our questionnaires, we specifically did not include a question about happiness, because of the difficulty in defining happiness, in particularly cross-culturally. So we let the schools decide on their own what happiness is for them based on what's important for them. Instead, what we do is we basically ask them about how they feel or their perception on certain factors that we know based on the evidence are related to school well-being or positive school climate, and have the school together as a community decide which of these items are most important for them depending on how they respond. So it's definitely something that we let the school, each local context, decide what happiness means for them, because we know about the difficulty in measuring that, and there are already in existence many good valuable measures such as yours that cover other aspects. So another reason why it is great that we work together, because our two pieces of work are very complementary.
Thank you.
Oh,
And we're talking about a paradigm shift in education and even more broad than that, because What we're really talking about is what kind of societies we want to create, and education is a really powerful vehicle for helping us create those societies. But in the American context, for example, where there's real obsession with productivity, like, is that what we want? Do we want people just working and that's the main aim is just to support the economic system and that's it? Or do we want a society that's focused on broader aims of human flourishing and flourishing in in harmony with, for example, our natural world and flourishing in equitable ways, where, as Tyler and I were saying, we're supporting those who maybe need more targeted support as well. And so I think really that's what we're talking about here is a paradigm shift in what we want our societies to be and how our education systems can shift to create those societies.
Well,
And
a
there was an
societal
important distinction raised in the Q&A between high stakes versus incentivized. What we don't want is high stakes settings with flourishing. But yes, we can create incentives to invest in this. Schools can be offered additional resources to create programs on the promotion of flourishing and on character formation. That's not evaluating and rewarding people based on their self-report flourishing outcomes. It's saying this is something we care about as a society. We should invest in it. We can create incentives for the investment itself. But Reese, I'll hand it over to you. I think we are
Sure.
at our time.
We've reached the end of the hour, and a societal lens and perspective is a great place to end because I've seen several comments about flourishing at work and how this relates to individuals beyond just K to 12 adolescents. You can feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the staff section of the Human Flourishing Program page. Especially the Human Flourishing Program conducts research in all various aspects of society. So we're glad that you are partnering with us today around these topics from K-12 adolescents. But I'll give it to you, Christina, for the very last word. But again, since we're at the end of the hour, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here.
That's it. Thank you all so much for joining and for working in partnership with us on this work. And thank you especially to Tyler and Sonia and Reese for helping along the way with this session. And we hope to hear from some of you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you all, and please join our webinar on May 20th as well to learn more about our Flourishing Schools project, implementing these measures in practice and trying to empower flourishing within schools. Thank you all.